all the folks who are gathered together here virtually, all the folks who are gathered to here together in person. It is always wonderful to see a gathering of the Sangha. Yeah, precious is the word that comes to mind, but maybe that's too precious. Ah. In any event, here we are. This is the Sunday Sounds program, Sunday Sounds of Dhamma, and that means we'll have about half an hour of meditation, guided meditation, about half an hour of Dhamma talk. Hi, Evelyn. And about a half an hour or so of questions, comments, reflections, and the sharing of merits at the end. And it is the season of pollen, so please bear with me a little bit. But do let me know if you can't hear me for whatever reason. And announcements before we start with the guided meditation. So, as always, there's much Dhamma on offer. So, the next Sangha brunch for folks who can come in person is April 12th, and Kodo will be hosting that. So, RSVP for that if you can. It's helpful for us to have a little bit of a sense of how many people are coming and what dishes they're bringing. Also, now is the time to sign up for the virtual panel discussion on liberation, the nature of liberation across Buddhist traditions. It's a discussion that's being hosted by the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, and it'll be myself and about 6 or 7 other teachers. So very, very interesting, I'm sure. And you can sign up for that virtually. And what else? And the class, so the introduction class is happening again in May. It's a whirlwind tour of the whole 2,500 or so years of Buddhism in 5 weeks. So it's good for folks who want to learn something about the evolution of the different traditions and the different schools, why it is that we have different schools and who were some of the key figures in Buddhism. And yeah, I think there are other things too, but that's what's coming to mind at the moment. So you can always check out the website and see what else is new. And for now, we're going to go ahead then and get started with the meditation. And I think this morning I'd like to do a meditation on loving kindness, meditation on metta. So and we're just going to do it pretty informally, I think, but we'll start by receiving metta from all the folks. You know, at any given moment, there are some portion of the millions of Buddhists in the world who are chanting metta or radiating, meditating on metta. Thousands of them. Metta meaning loving kindness or just the sense of goodwill and wishing well-being for others and for oneself. So we'll hopefully open our hearts to that and then see if we can also do some sharing, some opening even further of our hearts. And if at any point it feels difficult or you feel a lot of resistance or other emotions come up like sadness or anger, it's okay, you can just be with those until you're ready to remind yourself that kindness is a part of your life. If you look at your life, you will always find some places of deep kindness. So just beginning by settling into your meditation posture. Okay, it's often good to begin with some movement of the body, a little bit of rocking from side to side and front to back. Maybe moving the head. And then allowing the body to find an upright and balanced position. Not leaning toward the computer or to one side, as best you can. Sensing the weight of the body on your seat. Softening the belly. And really letting the body continue to settle right here, right now. Taking a few more moments to tune in to the natural stability of the body. Even amidst those small movements of balance and breath, and there's a steadiness. And softening the muscles of the face and the neck. Just resting the body. And aware that there are thousands of people around the world practicing loving kindness right now at this moment. Sending loving kindness in your direction. Can you open your heart and receive that? Receive the kindness and goodwill of others. Love and kindness is being shared with you right now by many, many people. And maybe it helps to visualize them. A grandmother in Vietnam saying her evening prayers right now. Some Sri Lankan monk in LA doing morning chanting. Or nuns in Italy. Meditating, radiating that beautiful quality of loving kindness all over the world. And having received that loving kindness, that metta, and letting it spark that quality within your mind and heart. Then really setting that intention for yourself. May I be well and happy. May I have a deep sense of well-being. Allowing the breath to also be a support, if that's helpful. Loving kindness becoming stronger with each inhalation. And setting the intention to share metta may all my loved ones be well and happy. May they have a deep sense of well-being. Sharing even further, may all humans be well and contented. May they all have a deep sense of well-being. And even further, extending that intention, strengthening that intention. May all beings everywhere be well and contented. May they have a deep sense of well-being. And opening your heart, mind, opening, opening, opening to encompass all beings everywhere with that intention of kindness, of goodwill. Beautiful. That's our meditation for today. So now I'm going to share some Dhamma reflections. And but first, as always, I'm going to begin with the homage to the Buddha and the Triple Gem, actually. And everyone's welcome to chant along. Yes. Okay. Hopefully you can see that on your screen. There you go. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Bhutang dhammang sanghang namasami. In recent weeks, I have been noticing that in Buddhist circles, if you will, in the Buddhist sphere, the Dharma sphere, there's a lot of talk about love. A lot of people teaching about love and talking about love. And I thought, oh, okay, let's talk about metta. People want to talk about love. Yeah. Especially with everything that's going on in the world. It's probably good to talk a little bit about loving kindness. That's this Pali word is metta. Maitri in Sanskrit. Sorry, the pollen. And it's often translated as loving kindness, or Bhante Gunaratana wrote a book about it and calls it loving friendliness because it's related to the word Maitri, means mitta, is related to the word metta, which is friend. And it's a very important part of early Buddhist teachings. Is something very frequently taught right from the beginning, the sasana, from the beginning of the group of Buddhist practitioners learning the path from the Buddha. And it's a practice that's been really important in my life, actually. I started practicing metta when I had just recently moved into San Francisco Zen Center and become a resident there. And I think that because I wasn't sure whether it was going to work or not, I was very aware of observing how it was for me, like really observing what was going on, my feelings about different things, or, what was the day like living there. I was still working actually outside the building at that time, working a secular job, but living there at the city center in the heart of San Francisco, at a place where I'd been practicing already on a daily basis for a while. And it was different to move in. And at one point, I went to my teacher, Shosan Victoria Austin, who was here last year for Koda's ordination. Some of you met her. At one point, I went to Shosan and I said, Shosan, I wake up every morning just furious, absolutely furious. And it's not the bell, and it's not, what I dreamed or what somebody said to me the day before, or, the time of day or anything. It's just this huge burden of anger that I'm carrying around. And I notice it right away when I wake up in the morning. And she said to me, "Oh, it sounds like you should practice some metta, Sounds like you need to do a little metta practice." Because metta is traditionally a practice that is said to be specifically a kind of antidote for anger and fear in the mind, for these unwholesome states. And I don't think that Shosan thought, that I was going to still be doing metta at this point in my practice. I think she thought of it as like a tool that she was giving me at that point in time. But that was 2005, and here we are, and now I'm practicing metta many, many times a day, actually, many, many times a day, whether it's recitation or the meditation or various different ways of doing it. So that practice has been really transformational for me and very meaningful for me in seeing how it really did make it possible for me to change the very basic tendencies of my mind, some very, very old and very charged habits that I had in my mind. So I saw, and I have seen and continue to see firsthand the power of metta. And as I said, there are different ways to practice metta. So traditionally, more or less, they fall into one of two categories. One way is phrases, using different phrases to express the intention of loving kindness toward yourself, toward different groups of people, toward different classes of beings, toward different geographies or places, or for all beings everywhere. So that's one way, the chanting or recitation. There's a very well-known in early Buddhist, well, also used in the Mahayana quite a bit, the Buddha's words on loving kindness. In Pali, it's Karaniya Metta Sutta. That's often recited or chanted as a way of practicing metta. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And then there is also another way, which is think about metta as a quality or as an energy or as a light that fills the mind, fills all the space, and becomes a limitless, a boundless, it's called an immeasurable form of meditation on this beautiful, uplifted quality. And there are some very simple instructions for that we see again and again and again in the early teachings. And I've spoken before a little bit, I think, about even folks who are brand new to the Buddhist teachings, like the Kalamas, when the Buddha had his first encounter with the Kalamas, and they asked him about whose teachings to follow because they were encountering a lot of different kinds of teachings. He talked to them about how to discern. And then the very first teaching he gave them was a teaching on how to do this boundless form of metta meditation. So metta has all these various qualities. It's said to have, 11 benefits and so on and so on. I'm not really going to go into all of that. Um, but the basic intention behind it is, may all beings be well, may all beings be happy, may all beings be at ease. And the example that's used in the loving kindness sutta, which many of you know, is of the mother who protects her only child. As a mother protects her only child, so with a boundless heart, one should cherish all living beings. So a lot of folks haven't actually had that experience. A lot of folks aren't mothers, right? So they don't know directly what that means. But the idea of cherishing others or really treating others as incredibly valuable and worthy of our care, that's really what it means. And if we think about it, we ourselves have been the beneficiaries of care from someone, most likely from many people. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, right? So really, really taking up this intention to treat others with care and to value their well-being as much as ours, right? So we value our own well-being and we value their well-being. And we set that intention, and whether we are perfect at fulfilling that intention or not is actually not the point. The point is to continue to establish that intention time and again, and to make our best effort time and again, and to actually encounter the times when we can't as well with honesty, and really try to understand what's happening there in our hearts and in our minds. So metta is a very powerful practice, and it's a very heartfelt practice, and it can also be a very kind of conceptual practice. The radiating form is quite a conceptual form. It kind of steps out of even relating to individual beings and just thinking of metta as a quality pervading the mind and pervading everywhere. But the Buddha said, interestingly, that the practice of metta is 16 times more powerful than the next best thing if you want a favorable rebirth. Okay? If you want a favorable rebirth, then metta is a good thing. 16 times. I don't know where he gets 16 times. That's a very interesting number. But okay, a lot. Okay, a lot more powerful than the next best thing. At what? At putting good stuff into the karmic stream. That's what that means, right? It means putting good, powerful, beneficial karmic momentum into the karmic stream. Very, very powerful practice. Mm. So, if you're in it for bang for the buck, then you would say, metta has a lot of bang for the buck, right? But the one thing that I want to call out, and this is where I have to be a little bit, where I have to be a little bit stepping away from some of what I hear in the Buddhist sphere. And that is about metta as a means to full awakening. Because I think that if you look very carefully at the teachings, you will see that time and again, the teachings actually say that that's not possible. That just loving kindness is not sufficient for full enlightenment. And that makes sense. If you think about it, just think about it from a secular perspective. If love was the only thing that you needed in order to be enlightened, then we wouldn't need four truths, and we wouldn't need mindfulness, and we wouldn't need an Eightfold Path. Because poets and priests and mothers and all sorts of people have been advocating for more love for a very, very long time. But that's not enough. I'm sorry to say, for those of you who think it is or thought it is, or want it to be, because I can understand that desire, that it would be enough. But the basis, you have to think about this in terms of enlightenment is freedom, and it's freedom that comes from understanding the nature of our minds and bodies and of the whole world. And the nature of the mind is not a single quality. That's impossible. Indeed, if you want to always have a mind that only has one quality, I guarantee you will increase your suffering. That is impossible. That's not how it works. You cannot fix the mind on one thing. So the insight actually into mind must be an insight of mind that is free of even the most wholesome of qualities. Do you see that? So loving kindness can go very far. Loving kindness can actually generate, I would say, by experience, about 6 of the 7 factors of awakening. A lot of them. That's a good pile of good stuff. But there's one quality that's missing in metta, and the reason why it doesn't go all the way, and that is the quality of investigation. Indeed, there are many suttas in which we see the quality of investigation as singled out among the 7 factors as being the one that will take you that last set of steps to the very end, to the insight that unlocks it all. And what's interesting for me is that oftentimes this gets glossed over. So even in the Metta Sutta, what do you see? You see that we have this lovely beginning here, and it says, this is what should be done. So the Metta Sutta is not describing the nature of mind. The Metta Sutta is telling you how to work with your mind to generate a wholesome state. Because that's not its inherent quality. That is something that is based on what? On your volition, on your intention. Right? And throughout it says, let them do this thing and that thing. May they do this thing and that thing. The skillful folks who want to develop metta. And then he gets to the end. And so there is this part where it says, one should sustain this recollection. You should try to keep these wholesome qualities. This is a sublime abiding. So that's, or you could say a divine, a heavenly abiding. That's the English translation of Brahma Vihara. That's the group of qualities, these immeasurable qualities, of which metta is one. But then this, by not holding to fixed views, endowed with insight, one being freed from sense desires, one is not born again into this world. So that not born again, that is the result of full enlightenment. That's stepping out of the circle of samsara, the circle of up and down and good and bad and suffering and bliss and so on. And it is done by not holding to fixed views and developing this clarity of insight. So what is the insight that unlocks that? Well, it's very specifically, clearly stated. The insight is the conditionality and the volition that's inherent in that thing. That's what you need to study, actually. You develop this beautiful, boundless, immeasurable mind. But then you turn that clarity toward this study of, well, how is it that that's here? It's here on the basis of specific conditions, and it's here on the basis of choice, volition, intention. And in a way, that's what makes metta skillful. That metta isn't saying, I am going to put this wish out into the universe and then the world will be a nicer place because I put that out there. That's not Buddhism, folks. You might believe that, but that's not Buddhism. What Buddhism says is you're working with this mind, and by your intentions and your actions and your meditation, this being is changed. And when this being is changed, this being is part of the world, and this being then influences the world. And that's how the world comes to be changed, by metta. Right? So there's a beautiful sutta in the middle length discourses. When I was recently on solo retreat for about 3 weeks, and for whatever reason this time, I decided I wasn't going to do any walking meditation. No walking for me. I'm just going to read the Majjhima Nikaya from front to back, just back to basics. 152 suttas. I didn't quite get them all in the 3 weeks. I had to go a little longer. But in Middle Length Discourse 52, there is this beautiful conversation where a Brahmin approaches Venerable Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, and he says, is there one way to freedom, basically? And Venerable Ananda says, oh yeah, there's one way to freedom. And he starts by telling him about the immersions. Oh, there's this state of immersion. And then after you come out of the state of immersion, you do what? You investigate. And you see that the immersion is a conditioned phenomena. Or you could say in English, maybe sometimes it's easier to understand, a conditional phenomena. Conditional because it only happens when certain conditions are present. That's how it works. And that it's volitional phenomena, that it is a matter of choice. It is not something that just randomly shows up, despite some people's comments to the effect. No, it doesn't randomly show up. It shows up because those conditions have been put in place, in part by choice, by volition, by intention. But then the interesting thing is, Venerable Ananda goes on, not content to just give him one way, he gives him 11 ways. And 4 of those 11 ways are metta, and the other 3 Brahma viharas. So metta is in that sutta very clearly treated, just like the concentration states. And I think it's interesting that oftentimes it's easy for people to see how, of course, concentration isn't the end. And you can't get completely to full enlightenment just by concentrating your mind. But somehow people can't see the same thing being true about metta. But it is. It is the same kind of phenomena. So Venerable Ananda tells this Brahmin, yes, and you practice this radiating form of metta and the boundless mind and the beautiful qualities free of ill will and this brightness. And then you turn to investigation and you study it. How is it that this came to be? What are the conditions? What makes it present? What makes it absent? How did my choices, my intention, my volition play a role in all of that coming together? And then, the sutta says, then you can completely unlock. Then you can attain insight into the nature of things, which is so profound that it will allow you to drop off all clinging. And then he gives the disclaimer, the next disclaimer, which is, but if you're attached to the meditation, if you're attached to metta, then you can only go as far as the non-returner. You can only go as far as the step before full awakening. So metta even can become an obstruction by our clinging to it. As is true with anything, right? Even the most wholesome, beautiful things in the world can be misused. So we need to be very clear about our practice and about the way that we're working with our hearts and minds. You know, there's this simile of the snake in another one of the Majjhima, actually, the Middle Length Discourses, where the Buddha says the Dhamma is like a snake, and if you pick it up from the wrong place, it will bite you. Right? Even the truths can be turned in the wrong way. Even the beautiful, wholesome qualities. But do those things, right? Don't not do those things. As we said, they're very powerful and it can change your life and your heart and your mind. It will. It will. In really important ways. And goodness knows that all of us could use a little more love in our hearts, and the world could use a little more love, right? But don't stop there. Don't stop there. One of the things that I was surprised about is that I knew that Venerable Sariputta had been criticized at one point by the Buddha. But in the Majjhima, what you see is that the Venerable Sariputta, so Sariputta was known as the general of the Dhamma, and he was one of the two main disciples of the Buddha. He's criticized several times in the Majjhima. Why? For not giving people a teaching that went all the way. In fact, there is a case where he teaches certain Brahmins about how to go to the Brahma realms, how to go to a favorable rebirth with certain kinds of celestial beings by means of metta. And the Buddha says, you didn't go far enough. You didn't go far enough. So find the love and foster the love and let it make your heart and your mind bigger than you ever imagined, bigger than anything you ever imagined. But then let that teach you something about your mind, about this world. How is it really? And then you can have the bliss of insight. And that'll blow your head off. Okay, folks, that is what I wanted to share today. I actually had an entirely different talk planned yesterday, and then last night I thought, oh no, Let's do this. So I'll give you the other talk next week. Maybe, right? Depending on what happens that next Saturday. So time for questions, comments, reflections. Yes, Julia.
Excuse me. Um, I was I realized as you were talking that I've always felt, for me, I felt it necessary, or actually, I use all of the other things we're learning as a means to feel metta.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, well, enough said. So I guess I'm confused that a person could, well, no, I should say I would not be able to get to metta without the other things that we study.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. I can appreciate that sentiment, Julia. You know, one of the things that for me it's like that about compassion, right? That if until I can actually follow the instructions about turning and understanding suffering in my life, then I can't really turn my heart to compassion for that, right? I had to really understand it in a different way. So yeah, I any direction is fine, right? As long as it's generating more clarity. That's the thing. It's generating more clarity. Yes, Brian.
Thanks as always for a great talk. I really appreciate it. Couple things. So I was wondering if the following is from suttas. I've heard the teaching of the bird with the two wings of compassion and wisdom, if
Mhm.
that's from the suttas. And then also what you said at the very end brings up something you mentioned on retreat at Seven Oaks of your practicing metta and doing the phrases. And then all of a sudden you were investigating, what's the deal with all this mental machination? And then all of a sudden you had this insight that, as you mentioned, blew your head off. So I was wondering, at some level, it seems like we never abandon or turn away from metta, but what is that like when you get to the point where you're not even fixated on a Brahma Vihara?
Mhm. Well, so let me go to the first question first,
Mm.
which uh, is it from a sutta? I don't really know. I can't think of a sutta off the top of my head. That I think is just like a contemporary way of talking about Buddhism.
Mm.
I don't know. I'm looking at Ashley over here, who's also done a fair amount of sutta contemplation and sutta study, and I don't know that there's a specific reference where the bird,
Hmm.
the two wings of the bird. I think that's just a,
Might be in a Mahayana Sutta, but I don't think it's in the Pali text.
yeah. Ashley says it might be in a Mahayana sutta, but she doesn't think that it's in the Pali text. And I would, yeah, I would agree. And I can't think of a Mahayana reference necessarily either. I think it's actually a more contemporary metaphor. Still a good one, still a good one, because I think that is someone's or many people's effort to um, sort of bring us to balance. Right? Many people will find in their practice that they lean very heavily toward one side or the other, right? Into the meditation exclusively without any of the other factors, or into just the compassion piece and just the, you know, um, piece, the sort of heart pieces, but we need that balance. And so I appreciate the metaphor. In terms of, so let me just make a small correction there. So that there are two separate instances that you kind of put together there. So one instance was when I was practicing a certain kind of boundless meditation. And then and then I came out of that boundless meditation and I had this moment of thinking exactly that, like, what about all these mental machinations? Because it will be this state, this quality will be gone in a moment. And that is that recognition of the conditionality and the volition, right? That's the machinations is the volition part, and the gone in a moment is the conditionality part. And that, you know, was very helpful for me. Very, very helpful. And metta, the uh, the experience of metta, it's something like the energy goes out of it. When you have this very, very, very vast, bright, happy, for me, it sometimes gets kind of ecstatic, like the body starts moving and things. But then it's like, it's almost like like a balloon, like it gets so big that eventually the energy then gets used up of that. And then there is this, there was this experience of falling, 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 deeper, 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 and then untethered.
Is that kind of like a cessation experience?
It is a cessation experience, yes. Ultimately, it was, yes. But so you see that in that case, it wasn't actually, there was a little bit of investigation that was happening on the way down, right? But not really the same about the conditionality. Um, that came later. That came later. But the point, I guess, is something like this, Brian, mm, yeah, that the degree of intention or volition that's necessary to let go sometimes is very, very small. It's like all the other conditions are there, and then that just makes it so obvious. It's like, oh, of course, right. Um, So that's what's meant usually by letting go of the wholesome states. When I talk about letting go of wholesome states, what I'm saying isn't like there's some point at which you start to reject them, or there's some point at which you start to say, oh, this is useless. No, no, no. It's more like they've served their purpose in terms of the conditioning of the mind, and then it's just a very slight turn, right? And that the whole benefit of that then does its job, so to speak.
Mm, thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to say every question I've ever asked you has been responded to so beautifully. So I just want to say thanks.
Thanks for asking the questions, Brian. I appreciate the dialogue, the encounter. It's always great. In fact, I think it was Dana who one time said, I get as much out of that question and answer period as of the talks usually, right? But without the Q&A, I wouldn't know what parts weren't clear for you or what parts we could still lean into or things like that. Yeah. Yes, Hiram, and then Evelyn.
Yeah, I guess um, I've heard a lot of talks on metta. This was a great one. Um, but I very seldom hear talks about the other Brahma viharas. And I'm wondering if metta is sort of above the others.
It could be seen that way, honestly. If just thinking about the number of times that the suttas record the teaching of metta is so much more than the times that they record the teachings of all the four Brahma Viharas. It's not that they're not there, they're there with some frequency also. But there are many times where metta is mentioned and the other ones are not. Enough times that you kind of get the feeling like, right, like it had a special place, you know? That said, the four Brahma Viharas go together beautifully. And I don't know if you've ever seen, I think it was Nyanamoli whose comments on the way that the four Brahma Viharas balance each other is often used in the Theravada circles. And so just to say what the four are for folks. So metta is loving kindness, and you have karuna, which is compassion, mudita, which is altruistic joy, although I appreciate the empathetic side of it, empathetic joy, and upekkha, equanimity. So the way that it's talked about oftentimes is metta is the wish for others' well-being, and compassion is the wish for others to not have suffering. Right? So this is the positive side, and this is like eliminating the negative side. So the compassion is said to be sort of grounding the metta, that we don't get so idealized, but that we can still acknowledge the fact that beings are suffering. And that it's by our intention, we can help to be a force in the world for lessening that to some extent. So those two go together. And then the mudita comes in because compassion can sometimes be a bummer, right? Acknowledging that people are suffering, that beings are suffering, and that cannot be completely eliminated just by our intention. Then you need that uplift, that joy of the mudita to come back in and to acknowledge the other side of what's happening in the world. There's not only suffering happening in the world, there are also wholesome joys that we can resonate with in our hearts. So those two also are said to go together. And then the upekkha is balancing all the other three, because upekkha, equanimity, is basically, you could say, allowing that boundlessness of mind and a certain steadiness or a certain kind of having your sea legs, so that it's not just an emotional quality, but that it becomes, right, this much more grounded kind of foundational state that we can sustain in the face of all that stuff happening, the suffering, the joys, the effort, and so on. So they all work together. And still, yeah, Matt does mention more frequently. And then that sutta that I was mentioning is a very short sutta. You can find it in numerous like shorter compilations of the suttas. That sutta that I was mentioning about the 16 times is only about metta. He doesn't mention the other three Brahma Viharas in that one, for example. Yeah, thanks, Evelyn, and then Angela.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. The thing that I didn't catch really, and I think I just missed it, is the part where you were saying that someone had not gone far enough with the teaching that he was giving. I don't remember the name of the person, but that there was some level to which he had gone in his teaching about not returning and meeting certain celestial beings, but that was not far enough. So I'm wondering, what is the far enough? Did I miss that?
Yeah, no, Evelyn, I think I was giving, so it's Venerable Sariputta, and yeah, so the not far enough was him teaching a particular group of people in this example only metta without teaching them the additional part of the investigation of mind, the investigation of the conditionality and the volitionality of it. So he didn't add that last little piece, and that was what the Buddha was saying.
Okay, thank
He should have done. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Angela.
Hello.
Hey.
First, I wanted to say it's awesome to see you again. I went on retreat at Seven Oaks. I was pregnant with this small child.
Yes, there's that little being.
Yeah.
Hello.
I've been meaning to come to these on Sunday, so I'm really happy to be here.
Wonderful.
My question is around the conditionality. So, as a new mom with a little one, I find it hard to have the ideal conditions to get into a deeper state of meditation. I'm often don't have a ton of time, just me. And if I do, it's like while she's sleeping and there's a baby monitor and things like that happening. So I guess I just wanted to get some advice or thoughts on like what happens when those conditions aren't present in order to get into a deeper state of meditation and how to work with that a little bit.
Well, I appreciate the question, Angela, and so good to see you and the baby. And I will tell you a little bit about the practice that I did. So during my solo retreat, I had a few days where I was babysitting my grandson, my new little grandson, Jameson. And I made that choice because I had promised my daughter that I would do Mondays and Tuesdays with him, but also because I thought if Deepa Ma can do it, then I can do it, right? Deepa Ma is a very, very beautiful, well-respected woman, laywoman practitioner who was a teacher to many of the sort of well-known Western Vipassana teachers in the US today. And anyway, I committed. I had already done this actually before my solo, but then even during the solo, I thought I would do a little bit more, which is every time he falls asleep, especially in my arms, I just meditate with him on the six senses. So I don't want to go away, right? I don't want to go into a state where I'm not aware of my body or can't hear him. So instead of that, I do a meditation, a more Vipassana style meditation on the sensations of being there with my arms closed and my grandson in my arms. What does he smell like? What does he sound like? What does the weight of his bum in my hand feel like? You know? And it's just like that. And Deepa Ma used to advise the housewives that she was teaching to use the sensation of the child breastfeeding as their object when those things were happening, because that was a thing that would be happening frequently during the day. So the question of the conditions is more about what type of attention are you going to apply, right? So are you going to have an attention that will attend to many things at once, like a stream of things? That's a Vipassana style meditation, no problem, right? First there's an itch, and then there's a sound, and there's a thought, what's for lunch, and then, etc., right? Or are you going to do a concentration, and a concentration, even a concentration that doesn't go as far as an immersion, you could do a concentration on one of those attributes, right? One of those sensations in your own body at any time. So it's really a question of what is for me a question of when am I allowing the moments to anchor me enough to do that, right? So that's why I chose when he falls asleep in my arms. Okay, great. He does that. I know it's going to be several times a day. I know I'll have a good 15, 20 minutes, maybe not more. But okay, just that, right? Just that. And be fully, fully present with that, because any condition can wake you up. Any condition can wake you up. There's this beautiful story of Kyogen. Kyogen was a monk. He had been in the monastery for a long, long, long time, probably decades. And at some point, he got really frustrated and fed up. And he said, I'm leaving. I'm going. I'm just going to go live in a hut in the forest and, forget about all this Buddhism stuff. So he did. So he went to his little hut in the forest and apparently did, sort of think that he had stopped practicing. And then one day he was out front sweeping his porch, and this is in China. So his porch is held up by these two pieces of bamboo. And one of the pebbles that was on the porch that he was sweeping, strikes the bamboo, knock, and he wakes up. And he has to go back now and tell his teacher that this is what happened, right? Because supposedly he had given up. Supposedly he wasn't practicing, right? But there was something about his kind of setting aside some idea about what the practice was and just being with his life fully that made it possible for the knock to be the condition for him. So just think about that in terms of your own life.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Michelle.
Thank you for that teaching and response to Angela. It reminded me many years ago, well, not that many, maybe 10, when because Iyengar passed away, the yoga teacher, I remember reading his obituary, and in this line really stood out to me is at the end of the obituary, he said, well, people say to me, I don't have time to do yoga. And I say, just do tree pose while you're stirring the rice.
Mm.
And I just always love that. And I try to think of that sometimes. And I'm like, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for that. And like, you can find moments. And when you're teaching, brought that to mind. So thank you.
Mm. Yes. Yes. Yeah. I mean, this experience of a human life is what we're studying, right? Whether we're on the cushion or not on the cushion. So, or on the chair or not on the chair, or on the bench or not on the bench, whatever your support happens to be. Maybe Beth will wake up from the dog licking her face. We don't know. Could be just the right thing. All right, folks, we are basically at the end of our time here. So thanks so much for your comments and reflections, your questions. That was helpful. And Dana, I think it's your turn.
The practice of giving and receiving has always been a part of Buddhism and continues today. Giving to Dassanaya Buddhist Community supports Dhammadipa, our guiding teacher, the physical location of the vihara, and allows us to continue to offer Buddhist teachings in support of the awakening of all beings. Our support pages are on the website under the support tab, donate, volunteer, and offer materials. Thank you so much for practicing here today.
Thank you, Dana. All right. So sharing the beautiful, bright, beneficial karmic results of our practice with all beings everywhere, that all beings might be freed from every form of mental and physical suffering, that beings might be free from every form of delusion and ignorance by the power of the Buddhas, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and each one's efforts May all beings know themselves as wisdom. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddha nubhavena sabba dhamma nubhavena sabba sangha nubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. All right, friends, be well.